Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're making dog bandanas. These are really quick and easy to make, and you can make them in all different sizes depending on the size of your dog. I have several really cute fabrics here to work with. I used fat quarters mostly, but it doesn't take much fabric. You can also make them reversible, so you use different fabric on the back side, and I'm going to show you how to do that. For this type of dog bandana, you actually string it through the dog's collar. So depending on the width of the dog's neck and the length of the collar is how you determine the amount of fabric you need. So these are two that I made for my dog Izzy. They're different lengths. You can see the larger one is about 8 inches. The smaller one is closer to 6. She's about a 10-pound dog, so you don't need a lot of fabric for a small dog. But basically what you're going to do is start with the square of fabric, hold it up against the collar to determine how much fabric you actually need. I'll show you in a minute when we sew how you turn down the edges on the outside. You curve those in to wrap so that you've got that casing to push the collar through. The amount of fabric that you turn down on that corner determines the width of that casing. So you just want to be sure that the collar will move smoothly along that casing and allow enough space there. The dimension between the top and the point, you want to consider the size of your dog's chest. If it's a long chest, you may want to accommodate, add a little more fabric there. If it's shorter, you wouldn't. For a reversible one, you're not going to start with the square, you're going to start with a triangle and then sew them together along that top part of the fabric there, and that will make it reversible. So here's my dog Izzy modeling her bandana. She was not very happy about this, but she did it anyway. She's a good sport. So the first one was that smaller one. This is the larger one. You can see the puckering. It's a little big on her, but if she's standing up, that point goes just to the end of her chest, which is fine. I made at least a dozen bandanas this day when I did this sewing for lots of different dogs. By the way, be sure to watch all the way to the end to see pictures of all my little dog friends in their bandanas. They're so cute. But this one is for a larger dog. We're starting with just the square, so it's going to be the same on both sides. I'm measuring my corner for this one at about 6 inches. It's a pretty wide collar. And then the next thing we're going to do is actually tack down that triangle on both sides. So I'm just going to sew around all 3 sides of that triangle. I don't bother trying to turn it under so it doesn't fray, because it's inside that casing, it will be fine. So I just sew around all 3 sides, and I do that on both ends of the bandana. Once that is done, you want to put right sides together, and then you're going to sew down the 2 sides down to the point and up the other side. I didn't get a good shot of this, but basically I'm going to sew down both sides, and then I'm going to snip off that bottom corner and just some extra edge. You know, this is a dog bandana. Unless you're making these to sell or professionally, it doesn't really matter if it lines up exactly. You certainly can pin and do that, but you just want to be sure that you trim down at that corner so that that point will be more defined. And then you want to turn it right side out. So that's the next step. There is a lot of ironing in this project. You want to be sure that once you get it completely turned, you're going to iron. But I'm just using a crochet hook to push out that point down there at the corner. So that's why we snipped that edge, just to be sure that you can get a good point down at the corner there. Then I just head to the ironing board and just be sure that I've ironed it completely flat. Once it's ironed, I'm going to sew the whole triangle along the bottom. This edge is just top stitching along, basically we're sewing down the side to the point and back up again. That's not necessarily necessary. It's just really to hold it flat. And then you sew the bottom of the casing, so along the top again, so that makes the whole casing. Now I'm going to show you a reversible version. So this is going to be, instead of starting with a square, we're starting with two fabrics that I've cut into triangles. So you still do the same measuring, you still cut it at the width that you want it to be, but you're only needing a triangle of two different fabrics here. And then in order to make it into a square, you sew along that long edge at the top, and then you're going to iron that seam flat, and that will give you your square. Once we have the seam ironed flat and we've made it into a square, we're going to measure our triangle just like we did the last time. Although here we want to be sure we line up that seam so that, because eventually we're going to iron that flat, and we want that seam to be that folded line. So now here we're just sewing our triangles just like we did last time. Just make sure that seam of the two fabric lines up with the triangle and the collar. Now, just like the last time, we're going to turn it over so we're sure the two right sides of the fabric are together. The only difference here is we want to be sure that we just line it up a little closer on that top edge. Since it is reversible, we want that to match up. Then we just sew down to the point and up the other side, just like we did on the last one. And then from here, the process is the same as the last one. So you're just gonna, clip it, the corner, you're gonna turn it, iron, make sure you do your top stitching, sew along the casing, and you're done. So here's a tip if you plan to make lots of these in the reversible method. This is a quilting technique that you can use to create your squares that have two different fabrics on them so that you can make the dog bandanas reversible. You're going to take two different pieces of fabric, put right sides together, and then you're going to draw a line, a diagonal line from top right to bottom left. You just want that diagonal line, and then you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance across both sides of that pencil mark. You do want to be sure that you've adjusted the measurement of your square fabric to allow for that seam allowance. So you'd want to cut, if you're cutting your piece of fabric at 8 inches, you'd want to cut it at 8.5 inches so that you'd have 1/4 inch seam allowances on both sides. So you line your presser foot up against that printed line, and then you're going to sew down your fabric, which is giving you that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then you turn your fabric, you again line that pen mark along your presser foot and sew down the other side. So that's going to give you the two sewn seams, which eventually is going to become the two squares. So the next step is to cut along your printed line. And once you've done that, because you have sewing on both sides, it's created two squares with two different fabrics. So again, you always want to iron your seams open. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of ironing in this project. Really, there's a lot of ironing and sewing in general. It really is the key to making your items look more polished, and it just makes the seams lie flat when you iron them down. This one is really tiny. I made this for my niece's new puppy, Franny. She's a miniature poodle. So as a puppy, she was just little tiny. When I saw the picture of her, my niece Julie was just holding her in her hand. She was that small. So, but just like how it is with puppies, they grow so fast. But so by the time I gave her this bandana, it was kind of small, even on a little miniature poodle. So like I said, you just need to be sure. I think It's probably better to make them a little larger when in question, because just like I showed you on Izzy, you know, the smaller one worked, but the larger one worked too. So this one is, you know, I'm just doing the exact same process I did on the larger one. It was a little harder to turn it right side out with it being so small, but I did get it done. And then of course, just gonna top stitch along that edge and close in the casing. And here's Franny in her little bandana. I did end up making her some larger ones though. One last tip, if you have a regular bandana or even a napkin that has a sewn edge, you don't have to connect it at the bottom point. You can just fold it over, do your triangles, make your casing, and you're done. So like I said, I made quite a few of these for all my doggy friends. So as promised, now you get to see all the cute little pups in their bandanas. I think they all look super cute in their new little bandanas. I hope you like this one and you give it a try. Thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe if you haven't. I hope to see you next time. Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.